Hello and welcome back to the Toffee Blues YouTube channel, your source for all things Everton. It's kind of a week of relief for us all now. It feels like very strange only 7 days ago how stressed we all were about the potential of relegation at the weekend. Luckily, that Abdoulaye Doucouré's screamer, frankly, has saved us for another year. But it's it's not really the same kind of positive that we all felt last year. Last year, of course, we saw the pitch invasions, saw a bit of that this year. It kind of widely disapproved of, though, by the majority of Goodison. A very different feeling, as I've just been discussing with our guest today. Of course, we had to bring him back on. It is Paul, the Esque Paul. We were just talking briefly just before about how weird it kind of felt after we stayed up. But what was your experience like at the match?
Pre-match, fantastic experience. Just everybody in a good mood. I mean, obviously people worried, but it was a beautiful day, and everybody was just itching to get into the ground and start supporting the team. The the noise before the players came out between well, actually when they went off after the warm up, the ground was virtually full then, and the noise when they came out at Z cars and the support throughout the game, apart from that little brief period when we knew that Leicester were winning, and we obviously knew then that we needed to win in order to stay up. There was a temporary sort of pause in the atmosphere, but it didn't last long, and it was just tremendous. And then when the final whistle went, the briefest of celebrations, as you say, some idiots, absolute idiots, ran on the pitch. They don't do the club any favours. It cost us quite a lot of money, no doubt, in a fine. So why they did it, I don't know. But then after that, Sack the Board rang around Goodison as loudly as any other song I've ever heard at Goodison, on all four sides of the ground by virtually every single person, it seemed to me, in the ground. And I was in the main stand, which is probably the most conservative part of the ground, one would think, with a small C. And then when it became apparent that the team were not going to come back out onto the pitch, thanks again to the people who ran on the pitch, everybody left. And outside, walking down Goodison Road, it was very, very quiet. It was amazing. No celebrations, no chanting. People just lost in their own thoughts, I think. Yeah, relief.
Mm,
I suppose
yeah.
if you get one word, you'd have to use the word relief, and that was it.
Yeah, I of course wasn't at the stadium myself, so I had the pleasure of just watching all the matches at once, which I'm not sure was a particularly good idea for my heart rate. But obviously we knew Leicester had gone up, and just after Doucouré scored, I think was when they went 2-0 up, and that's when I started really worrying because, of course, Bournemouth only needed one goal, but I don't know, it never really looked like they were going to score. I know, kind of in the moment, it felt like any kind of lump ball forwards to Kiefer Moore could just end up at the back of the net at any minute. I was very worried when he came on, but yeah, just kind of got there in the end. And as you say, relief, just a strange feeling and quickly turning to anger at the board. And of course, if anyone was maybe expecting a couple of weeks of peace from Everton, there's absolutely no chance of that once again. We knew that there was potential investment lined up coming into the club after the end of the season. Haven't seen too much development on that, but we've seen a story about Moshiri being investigated. We've seen rumours about board changes. Of course, we're going to mention the advisory board and the absolute disgrace that no members of the board were present at that meeting. But I don't know, Paul, where do you want to start on the chaos? I mean, how many days is it since we managed to secure safety? What, 4 or 5?
It's
We've
Thursday, isn't it? So
Thursday,
since Sunday, 4 days. Yeah.
and we've already got all of this to talk about. We only spoke last week as well, so but we've got a hefty list to get through. So we may as well start off with the major elephant in the room about the investigation into the owner. It was published by The Guardian this week that the Treasury are obviously taking a keen interest in the owner because of his links with Usmanov. The links to Usmanov, not something that has ever been a particularly well kept secret. Not that I think anyone was trying to keep it a secret. It's all been well known for a while, but now there's a lot of talk about will something happen to Everton, as the same did with Chelsea when Abramovich had to effectively give away the club for free. But should we just start off, Paul? What is the investigation? What does this? It's more focused on the owner than the club itself.
Yeah. So Simon Goodley from the Guardian has for many years, more than a decade, had a very keen interest, and I know Simon quite well, had a keen interest in Alisher Usmanov's activities, and obviously, that's extended to then Farhad Moshiri. Simon discovered some time ago that Farhad Moshiri was what they call a person of interest to the what's it called? What was it? The OFSI, which is the part of the Treasury that looks after. Well, when I say looks into sanctioned individuals and individuals close to those sanctioned individuals to see what the connections are, whether there's any sanctions busting or anything of that nature. And obviously, we know that Usmanov has been sanctioned for more than 12 months now, since March 2022, and he's not been welcome in this country since September 2021. Now, Moshiri, obviously, as a British citizen, it's quite difficult to sanction him. Normally, British citizens can only be sanctioned by the British government on the grounds of terrorist activity. And obviously, nobody's accusing Farhad Moshiri of that. But he is being investigated based on the evidence given to The Guardian for whatever links he might have to Usmanov. And obviously, clearly there are links, and clearly before Usmanov was sanctioned, those links were legal and, perfectly normal links between two business people who happened to be shareholders in the same company, one of whom was the major shareholder, the other was the chair. So it's not surprising that there are links. I guess the question is whether or not, and the only thing really that the OFSI can look at is whether or not Farhad Moshiri it's possible to sanction him for stuff that he did prior to the war. So, what connections did he have with Putin and the Kremlin? None of which I know anything about, so I'm not casting any aspersions against him or making any accusations.
No contacts in the Kremlin they could reach out to.
Who knows? I mean, clearly Usmanov has those connections, and given the very close association that Moshiri has, it's difficult to believe that there weren't. But anyway, so those investigations will take place. The other investigations will be whether or not there's been anything that illegal since Usmanov has been sanctioned in terms of contact payments, any benefits that may have been derived from that relationship, of which I know absolutely nothing about, and it's only the people that are doing the investigation that do. But obviously, that has a consequence. One of the consequences is that the American banks find it very difficult to do business with people who may be being investigated on a sanctions basis. They take a much more hardline view than the British do. So that's been a problem for a while, actually, in terms of Everton getting funding out of the US. And I know MSP, that other people who are going to come in, are an American institution, but there's a way that they can do that. And obviously, some of the British banks as well have been cautious about sanctions busting, because banks like HSBC have had enormous fines over the years, running into billions of dollars for breaking sanctions, either wittingly or unwittingly. So it's no surprise to learn that whoever Farhad Moshiri's British bank is had stopped their relationship sometime last autumn. I think it was September last year. So Moshiri, as I say, is a person of interest, and that does cause difficulties for Everton Football Club in the context of Everton Football Club raising money from other investors. It's unlikely, even if Moshiri was to be sanctioned, that Everton itself would be sanctioned. I mean, sometimes there's quite a misunderstanding. So when, for example, Abramovich was sanctioned by the British government, Chelsea, because they were a going concern, because they're an active business, people assume that Chelsea was sanctioned as well. They weren't. They were put into like a form, actually put into like a form of administration where the government acts as the administrator, or the Treasury acts as the administrator, and the Treasury controls what and did control what Chelsea could spend and who could give Chelsea the money. So if you recall, the problem Chelsea had was that they ran out of cash very quickly because people couldn't pay them anything, and the UK government actually gave Abramovich a special license to inject £30 million into Chelsea. Now, if it turned out that Moshiri was sanctioned, the same might apply to Everton. But one of the ways of getting around that before it was to happen, and I'm not saying it will happen, I'm just saying, if it was to happen, is to take Moshiri's shareholding down from 94% down to 49%, so that he's no longer in control of the business. And that might possibly be achieved by bringing a new investor in. So a new investor comes in, the new investor gets issued a load of shares, and by issuing those shares, dilutes Farhad Moshiri down to 49.9%, for example. If they did that, then whether Moshiri was sanctioned or not, it would have no impact on Everton Football Club. It shouldn't have an impact, but it would definitely not have an impact if we went down that route. But that's a slightly technical explanation of what might happen.
And it makes for a great headline that obviously took to Everton Twitter very well, that the owner is being investigated. And of course, people ask the questions because we knew, well, as you've spoken, and as we already know, Usmanov and Moshiri had a lot of links. Of course, they're both shareholders at Arsenal. It's the rumor is that Moshiri ended up with his shares at Arsenal as a gift from Usmanov, which he then sold and bought Everton. So there's investigations into that. We know that. Well, we don't know for certain, but we're fairly certain that Usmanov was present when they were interviewing managers when Frank Lampard was being interviewed. So clearly a big presence, and as you mentioned, right now Moshiri, a person of interest, but not necessarily sanctions coming at the club. So it will be interesting to see how that develops. But in terms of the investment, I don't know, Paul, as far as you're aware of that, is that still continuing?
Yeah, just before I answer that question, just on a point of accuracy more than anything else, I think. So yes, there were allegations that Usmanov gifted the money to Farhad Moshiri for Farhad Moshiri to then buy his Arsenal share. So effectively, he was buying it with Usmanov's money. When the Guardian and the BBC first made those allegations in November 2018, Farhad Moshiri actually provided proof that one of his companies, a wholly owned company of Farhad Moshiri's, actually paid for the shares with his own money. So both the BBC and the Guardian withdrew that accusation at the time, although I believe that the Guardian are now less certain that what they were told and what they were given as proof was accurate. But as it stands, nobody's ever proved that Moshiri didn't pay for his Arsenal shares. Anyway, that's just as a sort of,
Yeah.
just tying up the loose ends on that. Investment's going to happen because it has to, and it is going to be MSP. What form it takes is down to whatever negotiations have taken place between Farhad Moshiri and MSP, but it's clearly going to include the immediate cash requirements for the stadium, and it's going to include some money, loosely termed as working capital, which keeps Everton solvent over the summer. What it won't do, and in return, and I think this is the bit that's changed in recent weeks, MSP take a significant stake in Everton in return for those funds. Originally, it was going to be a loan, and then it might have been a loan with warrants, giving them 25% at some point. I actually think it's going to be a different deal this time, or not this time, a different deal, which gives MSP probably a majority shareholding in the football club. But it is going to happen, and it has to happen pretty quickly, because of the financial position Everton find themselves in and the liabilities that Everton have. Not being relegated saved us the biggest problem of all, which was the loss of broadcasting income next year, and the fact that rights and media funding may have called the loan in had we been relegated. So the moment the final whistle went on Sunday, the risks to the business were reduced significantly, but actually our financial position didn't change that much, because obviously we won't get the broadcasting revenue from Sky for next season until later in the summer. So the period between now and whenever those payments are made, which will probably be at the beginning of August, nothing's changed for Everton, and we do need that money in, one, to pay for the next phase of the stadium development, and secondly, as I say, to continue the lights being on at Royal Liver Building through the summer, because we are desperately short of cash. What it does mean is that we're not going to have, and I know I'm a bit like a broken record, but this is the case. We're not going to have a lot of money, if indeed any money, to spend in the transfer market without there being player sales.
We've potentially already seen an example of that with Conor Cody. Of course, the option on his loan wasn't taken up, but I know that he did fall out of favour with Dyche, but only 4 million was potentially seen as too expensive for a substitute. But there's potentially signs of more to come this summer.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the Cody deal wouldn't have gone through until the window opened anyway, which is 15th of June. So there would have always been this period between the end of the loan and him going back to his host club anyway. But I think Kevin Thelwell sort of indicated that they're not going to take up the option, haven't they? So that is the case. It's I think it's going to be a really difficult summer, and to an extent, Dyche made clear that he understood that, even though he still wanted clarity. I thought what he said and how he spoke after the game on Sunday, I thought he was very good, because he was very honest and very direct. And whereas in previous weeks, in previous months really, he'd been very cautious about what he had to say about the future. I felt that now that the season was over, and now that the club's position in the league at least was secured, he could start saying the things that he wanted to say. So he talked about needing to know what the situation was regarding the club, regarding all the different things that needed to be changed within the club, all of the improvements that needed to be made, and obviously also, what's his budget's going to be? How can we make the improvements over the summer that we need to make in order for us to be in a better position than we were at the end of the season? And how he achieves that, and how it's not just him, is it? It's he and Kevin Thelwell. How they achieve that is going to be really interesting to see, because without player disposals, we're not going to have huge amounts of cash to make player acquisitions. A lot of people on Twitter have been asking the last couple of days, well, our profitability and sustainability situation has improved, hasn't it? And it has improved, but not to the extent that it gives us free rein. And anyway, we don't have the cash anyway. But even if the cash was to come in through an investor, we're still in a position where, even if we've broken even this year, which we probably just about have, our total losses for the last 3 years are still 165 million against permitted losses of 105 million. And there's a bit that can be taken out of that 165 because you're allowed certain allowances. It still means that we're in a very, very tight position. So there may be a need to sell players just to generate more profits to get us below that 105 million figure, or there may be the need to sell players just because we actually need, that generates cash, and then we can use that cash in the marketplace to buy players for ourselves. Our wage bill drops obviously by virtue of the people that have left the club at the end of their contracts. Yerry Mina in particular, which despite his lack of fitness, I'm very disappointed to see him going. I always think we look a better side when he's in it. But yeah, remaining in the Premier League, bringing in new investors, bringing in probably a new board, and I'll talk about that in a minute, I think, doesn't really change much in terms of what Sean Dyche has got to play with over the summer.
Mm. I completely agree about what you said on Sean Dyche, the honest and direct, two words not regularly associated with Everton Football Club, but I think his sense of realism and just being open and honest with the fans is much appreciated. Maybe getting some on side that weren't, of course, saving us from relegation does definitely help in that. But as you just touched on, just towards the end there about changes that the board needed. Of course, when investment comes in, that's kind of inevitable because no one's going to want to put in money to the club and not have a say in how it's run. And there was plenty of rumours on Twitter yesterday circulating about potential boardroom changes already. Of course, everyone was talking about all these blacked out cars pulling up to the Liver building, and a couple of other rumours about certain comings and goings. I know you tweeted one yourself about a potential new CEO, so I'm not sure what you've heard around the potential board movements. Obviously, nothing officially announced by the club at the moment, but it does seem like something is potentially happening.
Well, there's a couple of things that happened since we spoke last week. So, Everton Stadium Development Company put out a notice on Companies House saying that a lender had taken a charge against the stadium, or more accurately, against the lease of Bramley Moore. So that suggests that there is a lender coming in. Somebody's going to lend money. I don't know if it's MSP or somebody else. But the agent, so it didn't give the lender's name, but it just gave the name of the agent, what's called a security agent. And that security agent was a company called Blythe Capital. And it doesn't take 5 minutes to find out that Blythe Capital is owned by a guy called Andrew Bell. Andrew Bell is a guy from Liverpool, self-made, very successful businessman, still is the majority shareholder, I think, of AJ Bell, which is a sort of a retail investor company. So it's a platform for people's pensions, ISAs, and all of this sort of stuff. And it's in the FTSE 250. So a very successful businessman. He owns this company that's acting as security agent. But it also turns out that Andrew Bell is an Evertonian. He goes to the game. He can often be seen in lounges and stuff. And one of his great friends is a guy called George Downing. George Downing, similar age, from Liverpool. Again, another successful businessman. His success has been generated mainly in the field of student accommodation. So he is,
which I full well know how much of a scam that is, by the way. So thank you for bringing that up.
Well, thank you for contributing, Thomas. some of your weekly rent is going to contribute towards Everton in the future. So that's very kind of you. Thank you. So George Downing is a tax exile, now lives in Verbier, Switzerland. And the thought process is that George Downing is likely to be the new non-executive chair of Everton Football Club, which suggests that obviously Bill is going to step to one side. There is some people say, well, that means that Andrew Bell is going to be the CEO. It might be the case, but I think the fact that he owns the company that looks after the security charge, or looks after the charge on any borrowings for the stadium, from a compliance governance point of view, it's difficult to see how he can be both, how he can be CEO of Everton and also control a company that might at some point in the future have to, take the stadium away from Everton if Everton defaulted on its loans. That doesn't make
well, we've seen plenty of that in Leeds this week, haven't we?
Well, yeah. Although Elland Road isn't actually owned by Leeds United, so it has a common ownership. But anyway, that's entirely different story, although quite an interesting one. So whether it's Andrew Bell or not who comes in and acts as CEO, personally, I doubt that. But I think the George Downing for chairman is likely to be the case. which says there's going to be enormous change at Everton. We're getting new investors in, probably a change of control, as I mentioned earlier, but definitely a change of leadership and management, which is, what many fans have been asking for, particularly in the last couple of years.
Absolutely. I'm sure that'll be music to everyone's ears. Hopefully we do get some solid communication about that as well. And it's not just rumors for the entire summer because although, it probably doesn't relatively change things, the clarification that the fans can get, well, fans deserve from the board, whether that's investment coming in, about the board changing, just need to, that absolutely needs to be communicated with the club. Of course, not the financial kind of sensitivities that we don't need to know the excessive inner workings of the club that could affect the club, but it's all about communication. And at the moment, all we're discussing now is rumours and what's been heard in back channels. So hopefully that does improve going forwards. But in terms of communication with the fans, an example, it's just something I'd like to touch on before we end up here, is of course the Everton Fan Advisory Board. Tweeted yesterday ahead of their meeting that at short notice they were told that no board representatives would be present. But which obviously violates the agreement between the two. So I mean, Paul, it's what we've come to expect. It's the state of the board, but I can imagine the answer to this question. But what do you make of that?
Well, funny enough, I met Jazz Barley, the chair of the fan advisory board, for breakfast on the Monday after Sunday's game, and he made it clear to me that he was expecting them to turn up because there's what they call a memorandum of understanding between terms of reference between the club and the FAB, Fan Advisory Board, and it requires Denise Barrett Baxendale to attend 2 meetings in every year. She's so far only attended 1. And it requires another director nominated as Graham Sharp, to attend every one of the 4 meetings. Now he didn't attend the last one, and he gave this notice at the very last minute, or his apologies at the very last minute for the last one. And Jazz was very certain that they were going to turn up, and obviously they didn't, and the club only notified the Fan Advisory Board, right at the very last minute. The club sent along some senior executives. I don't know who they were, because I haven't seen the minutes yet. But I just think not only does it put the Fan Advisory Board in a difficult position where the Fan Advisory Board is trying to gain the acceptance of the fan base, and hasn't done that yet, partly through some of their own activities, but I think they're put in a really difficult position by the club. I think the employees of the club who had to attend the meeting rather than the directors themselves were put in a difficult position. You're being sent. It's a bit like, in the days of World War One, the generals sending the troops across the trenches, and then they're not going themselves. Obviously not quite as horrific as that, but the point I'm making. And then, the actual fact that none of the directors and the CEO in particular, the contempt by which they must hold the fans in that they wouldn't attend. Now, look, if there's a load of corporate activity going on, as we described, new loans, new owners, blah, 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 understand that there's a whole load of stuff that they can't talk about. But all they had to do was turn up and say, right, these are the areas that we can talk about. We can talk about what's happening with the new stadium. We can talk about fan engagement. We can talk about whatever new developments are coming through the club, blah, 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 blah. They could have done all of that. They could have listened to the concerns of the people that are on the Fan Advisory Board without compromising at all what's going on behind closed doors in terms of the new ownership investment, etc. But they chose not to do that, and they chose not to tell the people, people giving up their Wednesday evenings, some people having to travel considerable distances in order to get there. And yet they don't have the courtesy to, because obviously they've never had any intent of being there. They didn't have the courtesy to tell people well in advance. And I just think it's disgraceful, cowardly behaviour. And it just demonstrates the contempt by which They hold the club, their employees, but particularly the fans. And if ever there was a if ever there was something that indicated why they should no longer be part of this football club, that was it. Apart from the fact that they haven't been to any of the games, apart from the fact that
Yeah,
they haven't
yeah.
even
Just
said
just
thank you.
one example in why
Yeah,
they are a shambolic board. I
yeah.
mean,
Why?
we've got a
Why?
catalogue of them.
Yeah. Why? I mean, where were the congratulations on Sunday? Um, Not in terms of celebration, but in terms of there was a task to be done. Very clear on Sunday what that task was. It was to win the game, and we won the game. Where were the thanks? I suppose they couldn't thank people that they think that they're threatened by, but where were the thanks for the magnificent support that Everton Football Club has had? Sold out every single ticket all season, home and away.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it must be very difficult to thank everyone but the Phantom Headlocker. Clearly, it's far too far beyond their reach. But I mean, it's an absolute disgrace. We know this. I don't know how many times we've sat here and spoke about it, Paul. I don't know how long you've spoken about it in Twitter Spaces for, but big summer ahead. Hopefully, we do see some changes. But that pretty much does bring us to the end of today's chat. So thank you all very much for listening, Paul. Thank you very much for coming on as always.
Yeah, thanks very much, and it's great actually to get some feedback from the podcast that we've done recently. I know several people have messaged me, so thanks to you, Thomas, for doing it, but also thanks to everybody for listening.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for all for your continued support. Bit of a quieter summer than in the course during the season. A bit less to come out on the channel, but still plenty for you all to enjoy as we all sit here and patiently await the beginning of the next season. So thank you all very much for listening, and join us next time on the Toffee Blues. Goodbye.